Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to get up close and personal with something pretty
All
amazing,
right.
how your kidneys handle sodium.
I'm right.
You might not think about it much,
Wait.
but it's way more intricate
Yeah,
and crucial than you might realize.
absolutely. And we've got a fantastic guide for our exploration today, a handout from Dr. Rasha Eldeeb,
Okay.
an associate professor of medical physiology. It's packed with insights about this essential element.
Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Yeah,
prepare to have your mind blown.
right.
Where do you think the majority of sodium in your body hangs out?
Most people would probably say the blood, right?
Right, but the answer is actually your bones.
That's right. A full 40% of your body's sodium is tucked away in your skeletal system.
Okay, that's wild. So my skeleton is like a giant salt shaker?
Not exactly. About two-thirds of that bone sodium is tightly bound within the mineral structure.
Yeah.
But the remaining third is more dynamic.
Hmm.
It can actually shift back and forth between your bones and your bloodstream, acting as a buffer to help regulate sodium levels.
Yeah. So our bones are doing way more than just holding us up. They're actively involved in keeping our whole body in balance.
Precisely. Now, the rest of the sodium in your body is split between your intracellular fluid, that's the fluid inside your cells, and your extracellular fluid, which surrounds your cells. But it's the kidneys that really take center stage when it comes to managing all of this sodium.
Okay, let's talk about that. Why are kidneys so essential when it comes to sodium?
They're like the master conductors of your body's sodium orchestra. They decide how much sodium stays in and how much gets sent packing, and that has huge implications for your health. Think of it this way. Sodium attracts water, right?
Yeah, I've definitely noticed my fingers getting puffy after a salty meal.
Exactly. So by controlling sodium levels, your kidneys are essentially managing your body's overall fluid balance that affects everything from your blood pressure to how hydrated you are. And when those things are out of whack, you can end up with problems like high blood pressure or edema, where fluid builds up in your tissues.
So keeping that sodium in check is super important. What else do our kidneys do with all that sodium?
Well, they don't just filter it out. They actually reabsorb a lot of it back into the bloodstream. And here's the fascinating part. That reabsorption process is linked to the movement of other important substances. It's like a cellular trading post.
Oh, I like that analogy. So what's being traded?
Well, the movement of sodium helps your kidneys reabsorb essential nutrients like glucose and amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. At the same time, it helps them get rid of waste products that your body needs to flush out.
So sodium is a key player in both bringing in the good stuff and kicking out the bad. It's amazing how much work goes into keeping our bodies running smoothly. But speaking of work, earlier we mentioned that a whopping 80% of the energy our kidneys use goes towards handling sodium and chloride.
That's right. It's a very energy-intensive process, but it's absolutely crucial for maintaining that delicate balance we've been talking about to really understand how it works. We need to take a trip through your nephrons.
Okay, let's dive in. What exactly are nephrons?
They're the tiny filtering units in your kidneys. You've got about 1 million of them in each kidney. And each nephron is like a miniature processing plant with different sections designed for specific tasks. Think of it like an assembly line for filtering your blood and balancing your electrolytes.
Okay, I'm picturing this microscopic factory in my kidneys. So where does sodium enter the picture?
The journey begins in the first section of the nephron called the proximal convoluted tubule, or PCT. For short, about 70% of sodium reabsorption happens right here. It's driven by a combination of factors: concentration gradients, carrier proteins, and the sodium-potassium pump.
Hold on. Carrier proteins, is sodium not just floating around freely in there?
It's much more organized than that. Sodium actually hitches a ride with these specialized proteins to move across cell membranes.
So they're like tiny sodium taxis.
That's a great way to think about it. And then you've got the sodium-potassium pump. This little workhorse is constantly pumping sodium out of the cells and potassium and creating a concentration gradient that drives the movement of water and other substances.
It's amazing how much is happening at such a tiny scale. So we've got sodium being reabsorbed in the PCT. Where does it go from there?
From the PCT, our sodium travels down to the next stop on our nephron tour. The Luke of Henle. This section looks kind of like a hairpin turn, and its main job is to create a concentration gradient in the kidneys.
A concentration gradient. So is this where my kidneys decide how strong my pee is going to be?
You could say that the loop of Henle is essential for concentrating urine and making sure your body holds onto water when it needs to.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does sodium fit into all of this?
Sodium is the key ingredient in creating that concentration gradient as it moves to the loop of Henle. It helps pull water out of the tubule, making the urine more concentrated, and conserving water in the body.
So sodium helps us stay hydrated. I'm starting to see this element in a whole new light.
It's essential for fluid balance. And finally, we arrive at the last two stops on our nephron journey, the distal convoluted tubular DCT and the collecting duct.
Okay, what happens in these final stages?
This is where the fine-tuning happens in the DCT and the collecting duct. The body makes precise adjustments to sodium reabsorption, and this process is heavily influenced by hormones like aldosterone.
Ah, hormones. So it's not just the kidneys calling the shots here.
Right, your endocrine system plays a big role in regulating sodium levels. Aldosterone, for instance, is like a sodium cheerleader. It tells your kidneys to reabsorb more sodium when your body needs to hold on to fluid.
So if I'm feeling dehydrated, my body pumps up the aldosterone to help conserve water.
Exactly. And then you've got angiotensin to second, another hormone heavyweight. It steps in to regulate blood pressure and volume, also by influencing how much sodium your kidneys reabsorb.
It's amazing how all these systems work together, but it sounds like there's more to this story than just hormones. Dr. Eldeeb mentions several other factors that can impact how much sodium gets reabsorbed.
You bet it's a complex system with lots of moving parts. Your glomerular filtration rate, or GFR, is a big one.
Remind me what that is again.
It's basically a measure of how quickly your blood is being filtered by your kidneys, and it can directly impact sodium reabsorption if your GFR is too high, for instance. You might end up excreting more sodium than you should, but if it's too low, your body will try to compensate by holding on to more sodium.
It sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It really is, and then you've got things like osmotic diuresis. This is basically when certain substances in your urine increase fluid excretion, and sodium gets carried along for the ride.
So what I eat and drink can directly affect my sodium levels.
Absolutely. What you put into your body can definitely influence how much sodium you lose. And then there are the Starling forces.
Starling forces, that sounds intriguing.
These are basically the pressures at play within your capillaries, the tiny blood vessels that surround your nephrons. These pressures affect how much fluid, and therefore sodium gets reabsorbed back into the bloodstream.
So even the physics of our blood vessels are involved in this sodium dance. It's mind-blowing how interconnected everything is.
It really is. And we can even see this interplay of forces at work when someone receives an intravenous saline infusion.
Okay, walk me through that. What happens to sodium levels when someone gets a saline drip?
Well, first of all, the infusion increases the hydrostatic pressure in your capillaries.
Hydrostatic pressure, is that like water pressure in a pipe?
That's a good analogy. And that increased pressure can actually boost your GFR, which we know can lead to more sodium being excreted.
So the saline infusion is kind of flushing out some of that extra sodium.
Exactly. But that's not the only effect. The increased hydrostatic pressure also makes it harder for your kidneys to reabsorb sodium and water effectively. And to make matters even more complex, the saline infusion also decreases the oncotic pressure in those capillaries.
Oncotic pressure? No, that's a new one.
Oncotic pressure is the pressure created by proteins in your blood that pulls fluid back into the capillaries when you infuse saline. You're essentially diluting those proteins, which reduces the oncotic pressure, and that makes it even tougher for your kidneys to reabsorb that sodium and water.
Wow, it's like a chain reaction. One change triggers a whole cascade of responses. It makes you appreciate just how finely tuned our bodies are.
It's a truly remarkable system, and all of this just scratches the surface of renal sodium handling. There's so much more to explore, like the intricate transport mechanisms involved, the interplay between different hormones, and how these processes can go awry in various disease states.
We could probably do a whole series on this topic, but for now, I think we've given our listeners a great overview of how vital sodium regulation is and how tirelessly our kidneys work to maintain that balance.
I agree. It's a process that's happening 24/7 behind the scenes to keep us functioning properly.
It's amazing to think about all the complex processes going on in those tiny nephrons.
Absolutely. And remember that mind-blowing fact we started with, that a significant chunk of our body's sodium is actually stored in our bones.
Right. It really highlights how much more there is to discover about the human body, even things we think we understand. Yeah, it makes you wonder what other surprising connections we might be missing.
It really underscores how interconnected everything is within the body.
Exactly. We've talked about the cardiovascular system with blood pressure regulation, and obviously the endocrine system is in on the action with all those hormones.
Right, but think about the nervous system for a second. That's another area where sodium plays a critical role.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, think about how nerve impulses are transmitted. They rely on the movement of ions, including sodium, across cell membranes.
So those electrical signals that allow our brains to communicate with the rest of our bodies depend on sodium.
Exactly. Sodium is essential for those electrical signals that allow neurons to talk to each other and to muscles.
So if sodium levels are off, could that mess with nerve function?
Absolutely. It could lead to problems with muscle contractions, sensory perception, even cognitive function.
Wow. So it's not just about puffy fingers after a salty meal. Sodium imbalances can have far-reaching effects.
Right. It's a great example of how one seemingly small change can ripple throughout the whole system.
Well, this deep dive has definitely given me a whole new appreciation for sodium. It's anything but simple.
I agree, and it's a testament to the complexity and elegance of our biological systems.
Well, on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today
Yeah, definitely.
and a really solid understanding of how crucial these processes are for our overall health.
Absolutely.
So the next time you reach for that salt shaker, think about that incredible journey that sodium is about to take through your body.
And all the hard work your kidneys are doing to keep everything in balance.
We hope you enjoyed this deep dive as much as we did. Until next time, keep learning and stay curious.